Hi, everybody. Welcome to our talk. My name is Marita Roos, and I'm with Jackie Goodall, Town Manager for North Brentwood. And Jackie and I have a history of working together on projects for North Brentwood. This is an unusual project which looks at race, stormwater, parks, placemaking, all seen through a lens of public art. So hopefully it'll be interesting to you. And without further ado, I'll share my screen and you can listen to Jackie.
Hi, as Marita said, my name is Jackie Goodall, and I am a town manager. I work with several towns, but one of my favorite is North Brentwood. And North Brentwood had its beginnings as Bartlett Farm, which was subdivided in 1891 into a residential subdivision called Holiday Company Addition. The lots in the northern part, you want to move to the next slide? The lots in the northern part were of the subdivision were eventually subdivided or became North Brentwood. The lots were smaller. They were hard to sell due to flooding from a mill race that ran through the town, and because it was the low-lying topography that was next to the North Branch, which was a branch of the Anacostia. Wallace Bartlett sold the land to his African-American soldiers that fought under him in the Civil War. And he did this, one, because he wanted to help his soldiers, because it was very difficult for African-Americans, former slaves, to buy land, because we were in the midst of the Jim Crow era back in the 1920s. And the residents built their homes, they dealt with the flooding when it came, and they began to prosper in their contained area. And when I say contained area, I say contained because they were surrounded by towns that were what we call sundown towns, that the residents could go out and work, but when sun went down, they had to come back into North Brentwood to live. North Brentwood became the first incorporated town in Prince George County, and it was the second incorporated town in Maryland. And I really have to give kudos to the people who have lived in North Brentwood since the incorporation in 1924, because they have spent decades fighting floods, and they've been triumphed in many ways. You want to move to the next slide? One of the big triumphs came was in the late 1950s, 1957, 58, the Corps of Engineers came in and built a levee that stopped a lot of what you see in these two pictures. The picture on the right is a picture of, well, both of them are of Windom Road, but the one on the right really kind of depicts what was going on Windom Road, and that's the road that we're going to talk about, our Green Street. You want to move to the next one? As you can see, in 2020, we're still dealing with flooding on Windom Road. But the flooding that we're dealing with now is not so much the flooding from the North Branch as we're dealing with urban flooding and the climate change. However, the citizens and the government of North Brentwood continue to move forward, and we continue to find ways that we can address this. You want to move to the next slide? This really is about environmental justice, because not only does the people in North Brentwood deal with systemic racism from the conception back in 1924. But they deal with the racism of, you want to move to the next slide for me? They deal with the racism of not having had the assistance from the government or from the state or from Prince George County in the years. And a lot of it came from just people not being able to live together. And you want to move to the next slide? One of the things that happened to show that people could not live together is after Brown versus Topeka versus Brown, which passed in the Supreme Court in 1954. In 1957, the town of Brentwood put up a barrier between the two towns. As you can see, that is where we are now. How do we, in 2021, deal with this barrier that divided symbolically the two towns? And so that's where we didn't want to remove the barrier because we wanted to leave it there for historic reasons, but we didn't want to leave it in its present form. And we wanted to address the stormwater flooding of Windom Road. And so we called upon Neighborhood Design Center to help us. Marita?
Thank you, Jackie. So we are the Neighborhood Design Center, and we partner with a lot of communities to provide access to quality physical design services, environmental design, architecture, and so forth for neighborhood improvements. We've been working with the town of North Brentwood for at least 15 years. We've worked with North Brentwood on the design of a community park a couple of times, cultural art study we're doing now, as well as the restoration of Sis's Tavern, which is a local historic landmark very close to Windom Road. So in 2017, we were invited to host a public process, a series of workshops. Initially, it was not completely public. We brought some stakeholders together, elected officials, longtime town residents together to look at how we could create some kind of story that would incorporate the barrier, but also the shared history of the towns. So as we moved through this process, the goal of the workshops didn't really center the barrier so much. It was more focused on using this site as a place to tell the greater story. So we were focused on the story of the towns and getting the people at our workshops to talk about what was important to them and what they recalled of the towns and their experience living there, so that we could sort of create a shared history. The group had a common desire to create a place where healing could emerge from this story. So this is one of the drawings that we created during this process. It illustrates the barrier up here along Windom Road. And this is the part of Windom Road that's currently closed. The barrier is right on the town line. And there's a park opposite the barrier. And so the consensus was really to address the barrier within the context of the park and use some of this natural land, which is currently also in the floodplain, to develop a green street along Windom Road, use that to relieve some of the flooding, as well as make a place for a site for the barrier that was integrated into this design, which actually addressed stormwater. So we looked at how we could tell this story. That was really key to this. So We looked at some design guidelines. We looked at how we could tell this story. We realized signage was really important. So we knew we wanted anecdotal information from primary sources, some of the original residents there, as well as just some of the maps and orientation that would direct people to some of the local institutions, such as the Prince George's County African American Museum, which is really a couple blocks away, as well as Sis's Tavern, the historic jazz club. So there's really a lot in there that you can really, a lot in the community that you can use to tell this story and make it a much bigger story than simply what the newspaper articles indicated. So to kick this off, we got some funding from the EPA and Chesapeake Bay Trust, the Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns grant in 2019. And our goals were to address the neighborhood level flooding with new green infrastructure, to relieve the stormwater burden on that park, the adjacent park, and also to create space for an eventual public art piece at the barrier. So as a first step, we developed some information materials. And then we we worked with the towns to set up a meeting. So we had a door hanger. We hung on all the doors in the neighborhood to invite people to a site walk and drop-in listening session. So the mayors and the town managers from both towns were there. And so there we are hanging out in the middle of the street on a nice day in October, fortunately. And then we followed this by a site walk where we walked down the street and met people at their front yards and talked to them about the project and the Green Street and what we were hoping to do. So we had to work on the design. So to initiate the concept design, we needed to look at how much water we could address in the Green Street. So we drew these drainage areas to calculate the stormwater volumes that we could use to then sustainably manage the water in place using different pieces of green infrastructure. So for example, we looked at having permeable gutters along Windom Road in front of the houses. So these are pretty inconspicuous, but they will collect water and treat it, give it some treatment before it goes into the stormwater system, which of course is very close to the river. And then there were some special things that we wanted to do at the barrier to manage the stormwater there. And so that included some stormwater planters with trees, as well as we considered some porous paving as well. But mostly we hope to manage this through planted green infrastructure, all before we get to the catch basins at the corner. And this, what we proposed here at the barrier, we didn't really propose a design. We were looking at how we could use the street and site improvements to protect the eventual public art piece with safety bollards so that you still don't have vehicles that can pass through here. So it's still no vehicle access, but you can ride bikes and walk through the area. This is part of the concept, which is the stormwater management pieces, as well as the future location of the art. So as we were completing this, we decided that it was, by then our partnership had grown considerably. You can see that besides the towns, we had some local arts organizations, the Prince George's County African American Museum. We have the Arts and Humanities Council for the county. We have Parks and Recreation. So we've got quite a consortium here of interested people who were supporting this project. So we put out a call for artists, and that was issued in, I think, 2020. And we selected a team of 3 artists just before we went into COVID lockdown. So, COVID lockdown, of course, impeded everything, including this project. So our selected artists were Nehemiah Dixon III, Bob Donahue, and R.L. Martins, all from the area. I think Bob's might be a native of not Rainier nor North Brentwood, or Brentwood, I think, which is the next town over. So they had to adapt their program to COVID. So they wanted to have different things that would bring the people into the art process. But what they wound up doing was talking to people in a set of interviews. So they focused on original research, history of the barrier, as well as first-person stories from local residents. So this was interesting because it did not show the artists didn't really expect that people would be supportive of keeping the barrier in place. As Jackie has said, it represents an essential history of North Brentwood. Removing the barrier would be viewed as erasure of a collective memory of institutionalized racism. For other residents, they've lived with the barrier. They've come to accept it as part of the neighborhood. So they live on with the barrier. So as the artist team goes forward, they intend to keep the barrier in its location in some form, not in its current form, which is completely crossing the road as shown here and is at present. But as part of an installation, they'd like to keep part of the barrier and then do something that will express the story of 2 towns, 1 community. They hope to transform the barrier from its original purpose of division into a place of shared memory and healing. So if I can, I'm going to have a little break here, and then I want to bring in a video, part of a video that was done in May of 2019. That shows how another set of artists address the barrier. Oops, I need to end it. All right, just wanted to give you a taste of that. That was by Orange Grove Dance Studio in 2019. And I think with that, we're going to conclude our presentation and take some questions. Thank you very much.